What's up YouTube? This is Bystander X79 and I'm coming to you today with the next video in my Duelist Academy 101 series. And we're focusing today on monsters. Monsters are basically your attack force in your deck. You can't play a deck without monsters in them. They attack your opponent, they inflict damage, they also have some pretty powerful effects depending on what effects they have. And I can tell you right now, the game wouldn't be the same if there were no monsters. I can tell you this right now. Alright, now as you can see, I have two particular rows here that I have set up. The first row here you have, these four monsters are the four monsters that go into your main deck. And the bottom four, these are the four monsters that go into your extra deck. So the main deck monsters are normal monsters, which are tan bordered. Effect monsters, which are the orange bordered. Pendulum monsters, which can be either tan or orange, and on the top, and green on the bottom because they're actually part spells. And then you have the blue bordered ritual monsters that go in the main deck. Okay. Now, over here on the bottom, we have all your monsters from the extra deck. Mentioned this in the last video. You have fusion monsters, synchro monsters, Xyz monsters, and link monsters. These all four of these monsters start off in your extra deck and can be brought out through various means during the course of your duel. And we're going to talk about a little bit more about that as we go along. Alright, first and foremost, we have the tan bordered. I'm going to zoom in on this for you guys. You have your tan bordered normal type monsters. Alright, now something that mostly all monsters share. Their names on top. Like I said before, if the cards have different artworks, but the same name, they're considered as the same monster. The same thing goes with different rarities as well. If they're the same, different rarities, they're considered the same monster. Alright, tan border, normal monsters. If you come down here to the text box, the text box usually contains a little bit information on the monster's lore and background in the game, and it doesn't have any effect on the game. Come up here to the upper right corner, you have the monsters attribute. Monsters are divided into 6 different attributes you have. They're based on the elements earth, wind, fire, water, light, and darkness. And then over here you have the monster's type. There are close to 30 different types in this game. Blue Eyes White Dragon is a dragon. There's spellcasters, there's warriors, there's fiends, there's machines. The newest type was Cybers that was added to the game. Alright, and the reason why monsters are sorted into attribute and type is basically to help build support for those particular monsters that can actually help build your deck and make your deck even better. Alright, down over here in the bottom right corner you have the attack and defense, the battle stats of the monster. You can see how strong the monster is. I can tell you right now, most monsters have attacks ranging from the hundreds all the way up into the thousands. They don't go over 5,000, and they don't go beneath 0 attack. Okay, up here underneath the name and attribute you have the monster's level. The monster's level indicates how strong the monster is and its overall playability in the game. Now, monsters that are level 1 to level 4, they can be played right from your hand via normal summoning. Monsters that might be level 5 or level 6, as you can see here, they need you to tribute one monster on the field in order for you to normal summon or normal set them onto the field. And then for monsters like Blue Eyes White Dragon, which are level 7 and higher, you actually need to tribute 2 other monsters that you have on the field to normal summon or normal set this monster onto the field. Okay, those are the normal monsters. Now we're going to get into the effect monsters. There are various different effect monsters in this game. And what we're going to do is we're going to start off with effect monsters are always the orange bordered ones. And this particular effect, Entangled Trinity, is actually a flip effect. It says it right next to the monster's main type. It even says it in the card text. And basically, how flip flip effect monsters work, say, is if you normal set a monster, and then during your opponent's turn they attack that monster, the monster is then flipped up. Alright, after battle damage is calculated, the monster's flip effect is applied. But then again, let's just turn around, say you have a monster face down in the field, and then it survives your opponent's turn, they don't attack it. You can then flip it face up. This is what we call a flip summon. You can do as many flip summons as you want, compared to normal or tribute summons, which you're only allowed to have one per turn. And once you flip summon it, that's when the flip effect is activated. Alright. We saw this monster before. Vanity's Fiend. Vanity's Fiend is what we classify as a continuous effect monster. Okay, monsters with continuous effects, basically, the effects are always on while this card is face up on the field. So if your opponent has an effect that can flip this monster's face down, the effect disappears. Another thing about it is that since when the monster is summoned to the field, the continuous effect disappears on the field, and your opponent can't really respond to that monster's effect. It's just there. Alright. Then we have this one. This is what we call Neospatial Aquadolphin. It has what we call an ignition effect. Basically, an ignition effect is basically where you have to pay some sort of cost in order to activate a monster's effect. In this particular case, you have to discard a card from your hand to the graveyard in order to activate its effect. Other costs to pay for a monster effect would be tributing other monsters on the field or paying life points. Alright. Then we have what we call ignition effects. Ignition effects are basically effects that this is not ignition effects, this is trigger effects. My bad. Ignition effects were Aquadolphin. Trigger effects are basically what happens when monsters are, something happens to a monster, whether in this particular case of Brave Raptor Rudder Strix. Whenever this card is special summoned by another Raid Raptor effect, or normal summoned by that matter, you can inflict your opponent with 600 points of damage. There are other monsters that have effects activated when they're either summoned, or normal summoned, or special summoned. Just be careful of how the card is worded. Other monsters can have effects when they're sent from the field, to the graveyard, or sent to the graveyard. I just recently did a Burning Abyss deck profile last week. All those monsters have effects that activate when they're sent to the graveyard. Doesn't matter where, they just go off when they hit the graveyard. Alright, so that's trigger effects. Next we have Performage Damage Juggler. Now Damage Juggler has a particular effect that activates during your opponent's turn. This is what we call a quick effect. Basically, in this particular monster's case, whenever your opponents would inflict effect damage to you, you can actually discard this card from your hand to the graveyard and negate the damage. There are plenty other quick effect monsters in the game that allow you to basically counter your opponent's plays. Alright, and if you read the text carefully, they will all say quick effect in parentheses before their actual effect. Alright, moving on, we have, and for the main deck monsters, we also have Pendulum monsters. Now, pendulum monsters, as I said before, are a mix of between monsters and spell cards. The top half is usually the monster colors. They're either tan or effect monster color in this particular case. Bottom half is always green to indicate their spells. They still have all the same things. The monster effect text box right there. You have the battle stats, its level, its attribute, its name. The new addition, though, to pendulum monsters, is that you have these numbers with those arrows and another text box. Okay, now these numbers indicate a pendulum scale. Now, if you remember the video I did last time and how I explained the two zones in the spell, the two zones, the leftmost and the rightmost zones in the spell and trap zones. Those are also reserved for activating your pendulum scales. In this particular situation, if you have two pendulum monsters in those scales, you can perform a pendulum summon. Alright? Depending on the scales, you have a scale of 3, a scale of 4, meaning you could scale of 3 and a scale of 6 means you can actually pendulum summon out any monster that's level 4 or 5 from your hand onto the field without having to tribute summon them or anything else. It's a pretty awesome mechanic to actually mass summon a lot of monsters at once. Alright, now get into the actual middle box. This is actually the monster's spell effect. So whether in the pendulum zones, they count as spell cards, and you can actually activate these effects. In the case of the 2 Dynamis cards, they actually offer extra protection to your other Dynamis cards that are on the field, which is pretty damn awesome. It adds an extra layer of defense, and makes things a little bit more problematic for your opponent. Another thing about pendulum monsters in general is that while they're on the field, if they're ever destroyed, unlike other monsters, which would just turn around and go into the graveyard, pendulum monsters, they don't go to the graveyard. Instead, they actually go face up in your extra deck. So you could actually just pendulum summon out the next turn, assuming you can actually assuming that your scale was untouched. Of course, any monsters that are summoned from the extra deck has to go to the extra monster zone, so you're only really allowed to pendulum summon out one monster. That is, unless we have another type of monster on the field, which we'll get to in a bit. Alright, last but not least, the last monsters we have in the main deck are ritual monsters, and they're these blue border monsters that are in the main deck. Now, ritual monsters are a special type monster through a card effect. Most ritual monsters require you to activate a specific ritual spell. This particular one, Revenge Red Executioner, it could be any Venge Red ritual spell. But bottom line, in order to ritual summon, you have to activate you have to have both cards in your hand. You have to activate the spell card, and then you have to tribute monsters equal to the ritual monster whose levels are equal to the ritual monster you're trying to summon. And if it goes through, you summon the monster. Now, as you can see, even ritual monsters carry effects, and a lot of the older ritual monsters from the beginning of the game, they don't have effects. So they were a bit stronger in battle stats, just like all normal monsters are. They have higher battle stats because effect monsters tends to have lower attacks, but lower attack and defense battle stats and stuff like that. But once you get the handle of how to ritual summon, it's pretty easy, and there are decks built around ritual summon by themselves. I know there's going to be new ritual summon support coming out in the next core set, Cybernetic Horizons. Just be on the lookout, because it's pretty good generic ritual support to have. Alright, so what we're going to do now is we're going to get into the monsters that you summon from the extra deck. I know we said pendulum monsters can be summoned, but they don't start off in the extra deck. They're sent to the extra deck. Monsters that start off in the extra deck, we have the violet, bordered fusion monsters. Alright, now fusion monsters, in the text box, you have a recipe. In this particular situation, Blue Eyes White Dragon requires you to Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon requires you to have 3 Blue Eyes White Dragons either on the field or in your hand, or some sort of combination. And then what you have to do is you have to activate a spell card that fuses. This one's Polymerization. It's one of the most common ones to use. Activate this card, you send the necessary monsters you have to the graveyard along with the spell card, and then you summon out Blue Eyes, your fusion monster. It's a great way to actually combine your monsters to create more powerful ones. In the case of Blue Eyes Ultimate here, it's not an effect monster. It's considered more of a normal monster because it doesn't have an effect. There are fusion monsters that do have effects on them, so please read those cards' effects carefully so you can actually be able to utilize those effects properly. Alright, next card is the white bordered synchro monsters. Now, the cool thing about synchro monsters is that it kind of blends ritual summoning and fusion summoning. How so? Well, if we look at the recipe, which is what fusion monsters have, it says 1 tuner and 1 or more non-tuner worm-type monsters. Now, this particular monster requires a specific type of monster, but there are others that don't require specific types. This is any monsters. And the thing about it is that the way it works, like ritual summon is that you have to turn around and have a tuner monster on the field, as well as other monsters with levels that will add up to exactly the monster, your secret monster you're trying to summon. So you have a tuner monster, a level 3, a level 4. This all the levels equal up to level 8, which is this monster. You could actually bring them out. Bring out this monster. Pretty cool. And synchros were from the 5Ds era. I actually did love the mechanic, and I think a lot of people are waiting with bated breath on to see how we can do it with the extra link. Or actually, not the extra link, the extra monster zone right now. Now we have the black border monsters, which are the Xyz monsters. Thing about I want to point out is that Xyz monsters don't have levels. Instead, the stars are over here, going from the right to the left, and this means that monsters have ranks. Now, cool thing about Xyz monsters is that you just need monsters of particular level. This one indicates you need any 2 monsters that are level 3. What you do is you take the 2 level 3 monsters, you stack them on top of each other, and then you put the Xyz monster on top, and then that will be an Xyz summon. Now, the thing about all Xyz monsters is that they're pretty much ignition effects, in which you have to turn around and pay a cost in order to activate the effect. The cost will be to detach one of the materials you used to activate the effect. And like I said, Xyz monsters have a myriad of different effects that can actually help your overall game strategy. The last but not least, we have the newest blue border monsters. Yeah, I know we have ritual monsters with blue border, but those go in the main deck. These are the blue border monsters that go into the extra deck, and these are the link monsters. Link monsters are the newest monsters and helped evolve the game into what it is today. If you look carefully at the card, this monster doesn't have levels, this monster doesn't have rank. Come down here to the bottom, it only has attack, it doesn't have any defense points, which means link monsters cannot go into defense mode. Instead, it has a link rating, link 4, which is the maximum number of monsters you need to link summon out this particular monster. It does have a recipe. In this particular situation, it says 2 or more monsters with different names. Alright? There are monsters out there that don't require different names. It just require you to have 2 or more monsters on the field. Like I said, this is the maximum number of monsters you can use for the summoning is 4. The minimum you can do is 2. And the way to do it with 2 is basically to have 2 lower rated link monsters, because link monsters can actually count themselves as a particular number of monsters to use in a link summon. So a link 2 would count as 2 monsters if you're using it as part of a link summon. So if you have 2 link 2 monsters, you can actually link summon out a link 4 because they both count as 2 monsters. There are other combinations you can do with link monsters and other monsters you can summon to the field to bring out higher level monsters. And of course, tokens do count in summoning out these monsters as well. Okay, another thing about link monsters is, notice the arrows. You have 1 on top of this one and 3 on the pointing beneath it. Since you have link monsters and you summon them from the extra deck, they go to the extra monster zone. And if they're in the extra monster zone, any main monster zones that they point to, you can then summon other monsters from the extra deck to those zones. So link monsters have become a bit more important to be able to summon out more monsters from the extra deck in a particular turn. Without them, you're only allowed to summon once. Now, I can tell you right now, there are certain synchro decks that could probably make use of just maybe 1 monster and just build that monster up into its higher evolutions. Red Dragon Archfiend is the first one that comes to mind. I think Starter Dragon could probably do that as well, since there's a whole lot of different Stardust and Red Dragon Archfiend cards out there. But as the game progresses and we get more link monsters, we're going to be able to do a lot more things and open up more monster zones to allow us to do more summonings. Alright, and that's why link monsters are very important. They're being incorporated into a ton of different decks just to help players generate that advantage. Okay, so we have the... I'm going to zoom back out. We have the 4 extra deck monsters. And your 4 types of main deck monsters. Alright guys, if you have any questions for me about monster cards in general, hit me up in the comments. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more content like this on my channel, subscribe, enable notifications to make sure you don't miss any videos in this particular series or any of my other deck profile or strategy videos that I put up. And guys, until next time, peace.